This is Casey McBride with NationalCrimeSyndicate.com. Welcome to the show. Before we get started tonight, I just wanted to take a moment to thank my pal Larry Henry, a fellow NCS contributor. He was the man that put on the Mob World Summit this past June in Las Vegas. This is my first show back since attending the summit, and I just wanted to give a shout out to him. It was a wonderful event. I met so many nice people and made great contacts. Looking forward to doing it again in May in Hot Springs this time. And I think our buddy Robert Raines from the Gangster Museum of America there is going to kind of be taking the reins, so to speak, on this next one in May. So I'll keep you guys posted as I find more information out. I'll pass it on to all of you. My guest tonight is somebody that I'm a huge fan of. I first came to know of him on Gary Jenkins' Gangland Wire podcast. And actually, anybody that's listening to this, I can't recommend enough to go back and listen to the interviews that Gary has done with this gentleman, because they're outstanding. And I became a fan of his instantly. And a while back, Gary actually asked for some music that sounded something like the Untouchables theme, and so I put some music together for him to use in the show, and that's what you're actually hearing right now. But I like this piece of music, and I think it's real fitting for our guest tonight, so I want to formally just dedicate this little theme song to this man. Now he's got his own theme song. Hopefully he'll like that. But without further ado, here's my interview with FBI mob copper from Kansas City, Bill Ouseley. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did having a chat with him. How are you doing today, Bill?
Very fine. Thank you, Casey.
Oh, thanks for being here. This is a real honor for me. So, Bill, instead of me trying to describe a little bit about who you are and what you've done, why don't you give our listeners a little bit of a background of just of what you used to do and why you would be on a show about the American mob?
Yeah, well, very briefly, I went into the FBI and spent 25 years, retired in the late 80s, 86 or so. I almost forget now. It's been so a while. But I worked my way, which I had my eye on, worked my way into the at that time, very young organized crime program that that J. Edgar Hoover had instituted after the infamous Appalachian Gangland Convention, and dedicated squads of agents to work solely on organized crime. And I arrived in Kansas City and was put on a squad, and spent the next 20 plus years working the program, and six of those years I supervised the organized crime program in the Kansas City Division, which was part of the overall Bureau's program. And we had one of the 26 or 27 organized crime Cosa Nostra crime families, what we call traditional organized crime, people refer to as the American mafia. And so it was an ongoing conspiracy, and it took all of our time. It took me the 20-something years to see pretty much the downfall of the family, and we were fortunate enough to end that my career with a enormous investigation involving their infiltration into the Las Vegas gaming industry, their tie-up with the Teamsters that gave them the inroads to get into Vegas, and it was a nationally recognized case that we codenamed Strawman. So that's that. If you have any other questions on that, but that's a brief overview.
Now, were you a police officer prior to going into the FBI?
No. You to get into the FBI in my day, you had to be either a lawyer, an accountant, or a scientist.
Oh, wow.
Uh, so I opted to go to law school, which gave me several options, and I had my eyes on being an FBI agent. I was as a kid, it intrigued me, and so I thought I'd give it a shot and see if what it was like. I could always go back on the law degree, but yeah, in that era, police officer, just being a police officer would not qualify you.
Wow. Something I've always wanted to ask you about the Appalachian event. Give me your opinion on that. What do you think caused more damage for the mob in America? Do you think like the Kefauver hearings or the Appalachian? Which one do you think had a bigger ripple effect?
Well, that's a pretty easy question. Appalachian certainly. If you follow what happened after Kefauver, which was a very effective and well done exercise. When you find out what happened afterwards, the answer is nothing. Nothing happened. Maybe I think one law was passed. That was it. Out of the whole months that they spent exposing the mob. So nothing happened there. Appalachian, on the other hand, turned the organized crime world upside down. As I say, Mr. Hoover responded with an organized crime program which didn't exist. Legislators became interested, local became interested, newspaper people, scholars became interested. There were grand juries all over the United States that were being called. People were starting to ask questions of their police chief and mayor. Well, what do we got? What are you doing? So no question it was that meeting.
Wow, good answer. Now, you've got 2 books out that you've written about this subject, Mobsters in Our Midst, which I've read, I really love, highly recommend. But you have another one, I believe it's Open City. Now, I haven't read that one yet. And now that one, I believe, is a little bit more about the early days of Kansas City crime family. Is that correct?
Yeah. After I retired, actually, I became more interested in having gotten some taste of it on the street, but we were busy. We didn't have time to go back in history, although I wish I had, because it would have helped. Actually, it would have helped. But I got on to researching where these people came from, or what was the city like, and I was amazed at the story, and so. Actually, I wrote that book first. I was more interested in the development and progress of a crime family that's part of Cosa Nostra. So it's more of a historical or textbook type of thing. It was my first novel, so it may not be or not my first book. And I don't consider myself an author. I think I'm a writer. And then after the success of that, I was approached to go ahead and write the second book, which encompassed my time on the street.
Right, a little bit more modern era. That early days in Kansas City, I just find fascinating. That whole Pendergast machine and is it John Lazia? Those kind of guys fascinate me. Where they're excuse me, kind of half mobsters but half political figures, and running the show. That kind of thing is just really what got me interested in this whole subject. And Kansas City has just such a rich history of that.
Well, yeah. One point you mentioned is very critical and overlooked by many people because of the entertainment view people have of the mafia or the mob. But one of their strongest points, and this goes back to their origins in Sicily, is they understand the value of politics. In Sicily, they damn near ran the country. They were a second government, and they understood that. They hated the government, they hated the FBI, they hated law enforcement, but they knew they had to live with it, and they knew that politicians tended to be corrupt. and or could be corrupted. They knew that if they had the political clout, they really had power. They could be a criminal organization, but it was not the same when you had the political end of it. And so the mob, through extortion and taking over the voting, political apparatus of the North End, where they were headquartered, the North End section of the city, they had enough power. And they did it purposely. Take over the political power, then they go to Pendergast, who was the main political animal, and we joined forces, and now we have it all. And in fact, they ran the city in 1930s, lock, stock, and barrel. Lazia sat in the chief's office, hired people, answered the phone. They had open prostitution, gambling, any kind of vice you wanted. The mob and Pendergast controlled this city to the nth degree.
Yeah, pretty amazing. It's when you see those old movies, about the big boss man in those towns and stuff like that. Looks pretty Hollywood, but there really was a guy like that. It's incredible. So you wrote that book, and then Mobsters in Our Midst. It was your second book, and that was, like as you were saying, was a little bit more about the modern kind of times, and where you were actually working on these cases. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that came about?
Well, yeah. The story was so large that I had to have a cutoff date, and so the first book ended in 1950. Because the next era was what I call the Nick Savella era. Nick Savella became the heir to the throne in 1953, and he was the boss for 30-something years, the longest reign in history here, and in many families. And so when I arrived in Kansas City, Nick was riding high, but he had trouble because he and another mobster here had been found at Appalachian meeting. They were attendees, which gave great stature to the city here, mob-wise. That was quite a thing for two of the Kansas City people the rackets people who sort of lived in the smoke era, or behind the scenes, not that recognized. Now they were national figures. So when I got here, Nick was the mob was had control of many rackets and things, and they were riding high despite Appalachian. So I was in it at the beginning of the program, at a time when we had very few tools. As I say, after Kefauver, no laws were passed. There were no organized crime laws, no loan sharking law, no interstate or syndicated gambling laws. You could pick off one or two guys but nothing aimed at organizational problems. So gradually, the first part of my career was generally intelligence gathering, developing informants, finding out who's who. Don't forget, the FBI was new to this. We were learning. This was unlike any criminal case we had. So from there, we finally started getting some laws, and briefly, by the turning point for us was in 1969, 1970, when what we call Title III was enacted, which gave us the power to legally use electronic surveillance, and that turned it all around. And now all the work we were doing was leading to electronic surveillance, and which they could not. They couldn't intimidate a tape like they could intimidate a witness. So we started getting the kinds of evidence to break up the gambling syndicates, loan sharking, and then eventually that Las Vegas case.
Wow, I like the way you put that. You can't intimidate a tape.
That was our problem. Trying to get people were scared to death. I don't blame them. And witnesses would not come forward. I never had anybody call the office and give us a case. It just didn't happen. Luckily, we had good informants, and our days on the street, following people, establishing patterns, learning who was doing what, and fortunately, they have a structure, so we could follow that structure and learn about it and document it, and then when Title III was enacted, that stuff turned into probable cause to use microphones and bugs or telephone taps, and so they couldn't overcome the wiretap evidence.
Wow, yeah, that's fascinating. Now, you're from New York, right?
Right.
So I'm just trying to wrap my head around, especially in those days, like here you come into a place like Kansas City, you're from New York, like you're saying, you don't have any informants or anything like that. So you're just coming into a town fresh and you have to just start from ground zero and basically learn, what's going on. I can just imagine nobody's going to talk to you in a town that small. As far as a big city goes, it's really not that big. And I'm sure that was a really tight-knit family. Everybody probably knew each other, grew up with each other or whatever. I mean, how do you even get started on trying to crack this?
Well, it's a combination of a lot of things, but mainly as a new person here, my supervisor started me off, and it was drudgery, but as it turned out, it was very, very effective. And the way the program began maybe was helpful in your question. The way the program began, because we had, as I say, we had very little to go on, no tools, nothing. No, it wasn't like working a bank robbery. We had a beginning, a middle, and end. So the program revolved around identifying people, opening an intelligence file, and finding out everything we could do about this person, whether there's vulnerabilities and what have you. And at times that led to little inroads that we could make in talking to people, and somehow, and in some ways, that's how we develop some informants. There's a lot of things in people's lives once you dig in that gives us an opportunity. So my supervisor gave me a whole bunch of racketeer files that had to be updated, and that meant reading and reading and reading. But I started to learn the interrelationships, where the businesses were, who had what, who were the politicians. And from that, you go out on the street and you watch people and you talk to them, even if they're not going to talk to you, because you never know the person you walk into that will talk to you, and that's happened. You get a guy that you think, he'll never talk to me. And then you go and talk to him, and he's got a bone to pick with somebody, and the next thing you know, he's found an outlet to get his evens, and he's your informant. So it was a multi-task purpose program to learn the structure, organization, who did what to who was in line for this, and how the gambling operations were organized, where were their outlets. All this had to be learned, and the opportunities started to flow in developing sources and your expertise.
Wow, it's amazing. And no computers, no, no cell phones. You guys really didn't have anything. When I listened to some of your interviews with Gary Jenkins on Gangland Wire, it's incredible. Just like some of the obstacles you guys had to sort of overcome to do this. I mean, you can't imagine doing it now. You could just, put something on a guy's car and track him or track his cell phone and all that. You guys had none of that, so that's,
Yeah,
incredible.
the first wiretap we did, our agents had to. We had bought an old retired telephone truck to make it look like we would telephone people. They had to climb the pole right by the social club that was the headquarters of the bookmaking operation to make the wiretap.
Wow, that's incredible.
Today you push a button.
Yeah, it's so much easier. Now I can imagine there must be a lot of guys that pretty much spent, their whole career chasing these bad guys, but never really bringing them in, never like seeing an end to their work. But I mean, I know it wasn't necessarily an end to your work, but you guys actually brought the boss in. you did it. That must have been pretty satisfying because your work paid off. You guys actually made a difference. That picture of you bringing in Nick Savella that I love. I hope you have a copy of that, like in your den, up on the wall or something.
Well, I do actually.
I would. I'd have it blown up. What a cool thing. You did it. I mean, that's what the goal is. For every police officer, you want to bring that big fish in, and you got to do it. So, congratulations on that. That's amazing. And the effect that your work had, like you say, you guys didn't know in the beginning that you were going to be leading to all these skims in Vegas and all this other stuff. So it's an incredible story. Now, kind of shifting to the Vegas side of this a little bit, you have a pretty amazing story about Joe Augusto and some time that you had spent with him. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
When the quote straw man case came about, and we got our first break, and were able to put a tap on some payphones that one of the mob leaders was using to keep in touch with his liaison man in Vegas because they had interests there. And that person was Joe Augusto, who was ensconced in the Tropicana hotel. He didn't have an official position, but he more or less ran the place. So Joe Augusto and this mob guy, we listened to him every day. Every couple, 2 days, 3 days, they would be in touch, and there would be more stuff come forward on who was doing what and what have you. That's a long story. But anyway, that was Joe Augusto. He was their man in Vegas, and he ran the skim, stealing the money at the Tropicana for Nick Savella and the Kansas City family. And so that was his background. Now Augusto was a fascinating guy. Who he actually was was in contention for 25 or 30 years. The immigration INS said that he was an illegal here. Actually, he claimed he was born in a whorehouse in Cleveland. His father was a racket guy who was murdered, and then he was sent to Sicily to be raised. And then he came back here, and that he is actually Joe Augusto. They said he's not Joe. Anyway, he was a fascinating character. I spoke with a Sicilian accent, was a glib, con man. He was everything. Anyway, that's Joe Augusto. Well, when the case finally came about and he was indicted, Joe Augusto decided he was not going to go to jail. He would work with the FBI. So he came in as a cooperating witness. And the fascinating part, well, not fascinating for us at the time, but Joe Augusto also had been tied up in a check kite out of Minneapolis with the president of the Tropicana, had been convicted and had been given 20 years on a check kite. And so he was facing that. So that gave us a problem because he couldn't help us if he was in jail that much. As you know, I mean, it would have been very difficult. So because he was cooperating, the federal judge in Minneapolis said, "We're putting Joe Augusto in your custody. It's as if he's in jail and you're the jailers." So we had to keep this guy safe. We had to find places to move him to. We had to guard him. We had to put people with him. But it also gave us 24/7 contact with him. And he was a fascinating guy. And, of course, he helped us considerably, no question about it. And he cooked dinner for the agents. He was a heck of a cook. He could really cook. He cooked dinner for the agents. We had birthday party for him in the office. He was the kind of guy who, no matter what side he was on, he did it 100%. So when he was working with the mob, he worked 100% in their behalf. When he came over to us, he was 100%. He started calling people, trying to get them to come in and cooperate. And unfortunately, he died of a heart attack while he was in our custody, which made it really, really tough on us. We got to know him real well, and I know you have to be careful. He's still Joe Augusto. He's still, that kind of guy, but a more personable guy you'd never want to meet.
Yeah, that's I've seen this. Seems like this happens sometimes with some of these informants and the guys in the FBI or the people that are charged with with keeping them safe and that kind of stuff. That there seems to be sometimes a little bit of a relationship that forms that
Yeah.
I find that fascinating. But now I heard in your interview with Gary about this. What happened with him? You guys were going to bring him into like a case in Chicago, and you guys were led to believe that one thing, and then when you finally got into court, something else sort of happened that you guys weren't expecting. Is that correct? Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. Well, this story is illustrative of why at times we're fighting each other, and which I guess is just inherent jealousies or what have you. But what happened very briefly is, in my estimation, they thought Minneapolis really had no organized crime program. They didn't have anybody up there. They had no family. They may have had some gamblers, but so Joe Augusto from Las Vegas and cooperating with the FBI in a major case. This is the biggest thing ever happened in Minneapolis. And although my own office up there, my counterpart supervisor up there, promised that we're going to work with you, going to help you. We know he's cooperating. We get up there, get into court, and the surprise is the judge bangs the gavel and says 20 years. And we were dumbfounded. I mean, here we have our own people, the United States attorney, assistant United States attorney, who I think, of course, he buffaloed us. It was all nice talk at the time, but to him, this was going to be a huge feather in his cap. He caught this Joe Augusto boy, the big guy from Vegas, on a check kite case, which was nothing. And our guys went along with it, and I don't think they ever talked to the judge or asked for anything. And so he gets 20 years, and we get stuck with having to guard him. And, I had a long time getting over that situation. So those are the things that go on, and no matter what he did, no matter how much he gave us, Minneapolis people, the Bureau and the AUSA would not capitulate and give him bond.
Wow.
So
you see these guys these days that are guilty of some pretty heinous crimes, murder, all that kind of stuff, but they come forth and they want to talk a little bit, and then they get put in witness protection and get off.
Sure. Yeah.
They have a couple things to say. and then they write a book and go on a book tour.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's a big business.
Yeah, that must have been really frustrating for you guys. You guys are working hard, and then you got the bad guys you have to deal with, which is tough enough, and then you got to watch out for your own folks. It's fascinating.
We had a lot of infighting with Las Vegas over this thing, but that's the nature of the beast, I guess, and you just have to deal with it.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, over your course of your career, I'm just kind of curious. Did you keep anything? Did you ever come across any kind of cool mob memorabilia or bits pieces that you kept that you still have?
Well, no, not really, because we don't get to keep the guns of the gangland murders, or I had for a while. I also was an instructor for the FBI in instructing police officers in organized crime. And so at the conclusion of the case, I would keep a lot of the public record stuff, all the gambling paraphernalia, their betting slips and their books, all that kind of stuff, and I'd use it in teaching. And but that's a limited area, really, in getting memorabilia from them, to tell you the truth.
Right. Did you keep those gambling slips and all that stuff, though? Or you still have all that stuff?
I still have them. Yeah.
That's great. One of the things that I loved listening to you and Gary talk on his show. There's the one episode where you guys are talking about, I think it was IUPA was coming down to talk to Nick Savella, and you guys had the bug in the house and were hoping to catch them talking, but they went into a different room. But listening to you guys talk, I thought it was fun because here you are, this is your job, you're FBI, but there's a side of you, it seems just like, us kind of mob history fans, where you're like, I just wanted to hear what they would say. I don't even care what they were talking about. I just want to hear this recorded, these two bosses, like what goes down when these guys get together and talk. So I thought that was kind of funny because you guys are, just as interested in as we are still. So it's great for us fans to have guys like you who really did this, that still take an interest and are out there giving us, factual history instead of just made up stories from grandpa or, uncle so and so. So it's awesome what you guys are doing. I'm glad you're still doing it.
Well, on that point, Casey, you're right. I mean, certainly when you've been working from the street side, looking in, trying to look in, and then you get on the inside. To listen to them talk. I think if I could play some of the tapes that I have here from the trial to people of Nick and his people talking and strategizing about Las Vegas and how to go about things, they could have been on the board of General Motors. I think people think that these are Dems and Does guys that sit around with a cigar and a shotgun and curse a lot and what have. These guys talk business just like businessmen do about crime. Now their syntax may be a little different. They may, although Nick was very, very articulate, but people would be amazed to hear these people sit down, and we have lots of tapes. We had a microphone in a law office that Nick had taken over thinking he'd be safe from electronic surveillance. So we sat in on meetings that went on for an hour and just heard them go, and you'd be amazed. People would, I know what their impression is, and even, even to us, it was interesting to see, how they operate, how they talk, how they discuss things.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. I could listen to those tapes for hours. Well, Bill, my man, I want to say thanks for taking the time to do this. This is a real honor for me to get to sit here and chat with you. I know you told me you first got started actually here in Portland with the FBI, and I'm, too bad that you had to leave Portland, but I guess it's good because you went to. You had bigger fish to fry. You got to go to a little bit more exciting place for your work. So, we're lucky that you were there and got to, bring this stuff down. So, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And do you have any future plans for doing any other books or anything like that?
Well, I've thought about the straw man case has never really been told. I mean, it's an enormous undertaking, so I'm not sure I'm up to it. But sometimes I get that feeling, and I'll do a little work on it. But that would be because it entails a lot of the history of Vegas, the beginnings of the skim and what have you, and the beginnings of their infiltration. I like history, so if I write a book, I'll go back and do the history. So that's a possibility right now, but I can't say it's imminent.
Right. Well, I sure hope you do. But any future projects or speaking engagements, anything that you got going on, let me know. And here at the National Crime Syndicate, we're happy. We'll spread the word and try to promote whatever you got going on. We'd be happy to. So,
I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome. I appreciate you being here. So, hey, best of luck to you with whatever you're going to do. And hopefully, again, we'll talk maybe in the future about some other stuff.
Anytime at all. I appreciate the opportunity, and the best to you.
All right, Bill. Well, you have a great day, and we'll talk to you sometime in the future.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Bill.